Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Connor Heaney. Connor is the managing director at CXE EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Connor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's show where I'm delighted to be joined by Dennis Van de Vijver. Dennis, my Dutch and Belgian pronunciation isn't always the best, but I'm delighted to have you on the show. Dennis, I've had the pleasure of knowing Dennis for about 10 years now. He is the co-founder and managing director at A Konsulting, where Dennis consults on procurement, extended workforce, contingent workforce, vendor management systems, and cutting-edge technologies. Dennis is a pioneer in this space. He's also one of the most likable and knowledgeable people that I've had the pleasure of partnering with and working with over the years. I had the opportunity recently to meet Dennis in Berlin at the Procurement event. And whenever I meet you, Dennis, it always puts a smile on my face. And I couldn't wait to have you on the show. So, Dennis, with that, how are you doing? Are you keeping well?
Yeah, good. Very excited to be here, Connor. So I've been listening in the podcast as well. So it's really an honor and privilege to be here as well.
Dennis, thank you. And I should mention for the benefit of our audience that Dennis has worked with Beeline previously in his career, but in his consulting business, he's consulted with such large companies such as Booking.com and Eurocontrol and a whole host of others. So, Dennis, can't wait to hear more about your business and what you're up to and the problems that you're still solving for. But Dennis, before we begin with that, What's your story? How did you move into being an entrepreneur? And of course, I first got to know you when you were with Beeline many years ago. So just for the benefit of our audience, Dennis, tell us about you.
So basically, I kicked off my career, Connor, in procurement. So that's where the story starts. So I actually graduated first at university as in communication science, and then I think as many people land in procurement, it's always a very funny trajectory you have. But one of the first jobs I applied to, it was a finance job. So you graduate from university and you think like, okay, something in the movie business or something in marketing. But it was a hard time to get a job, and I was offered a job as a finance consultant. So that was quite interesting for me to engage in those aspects. But I think one of those things that the accounting things were not really exactly what I like, but what it really triggered me was one of the second assignments I got as a young consultant, and that was in procurement. And that's really what kind of triggered me, Connor, because it was the first time I noticed like this is something interesting. So there are roles out there in companies where they have massive budgets and they give it to you, or the business gives it to you, and they say you try to go and negotiate the best deal. And I think that's really something where, for me, that's where my career started basically. So I think that's really the point where I was like, this is something interesting. This is something where I want to further develop in. And at the time I worked at Thomas Cook for a while as well, and that's where I got my first touch point with the contingent workforce. I was managing all non-product related spend, and that's where the first time I got in touch with this whole contingent workforce piece and a VMS as well. And that's really what sparked my interest. So that's really where I started like, okay, so you have procurement solutions, you have these packages, but then within that niche, you have this thing called vendor management systems to really manage the contingent workforce. So that's really where it really sparked my interest, and that's how I rolled into the industry, starting, as you mentioned, with Beeline, doing several roles, and then eventually, setting up my own my own company to consult in that space where, I think we all share the same passion, but it's something really what triggers me and what keeps me going.
Yeah, Dennis, I love your story and I agree with you. I think the extended workforce or external workforce or contingent workforce sector, whatever is the most appropriate description, is really exciting. And I think it's really exciting for the following reasons. One, the model is changing, right? There's a move, of course, towards MSPs, but also a move away and bringing that in-house. The vendor management, VMS technologies are changing. A lot of the older VMSs that were once best of breed are almost like the legacy now, and you've seen new entrants into the market. I think people's preferences have changed as well, Dennis, because people don't want to be a permanent employee anymore. She or he or they want to have independence. They want to have autonomy. And then we've got companies, large companies particularly, and smaller companies now, moving from a fixed cost employee model to a variable cost model for transformation reasons, CapEx reasons. And then overlaying that or underlaying that, Dennis, you've got all this regulatory change, and you and I are based in Europe that has, I think, 27 markets in the European Union, all of which are different from a regulation and legislation perspective, all of which are different from a taxation perspective and from a VAT perspective. So you've got all this complexity, all this uncertainty, and then all this appetite for these services and to engage people. So I agree with you. It's a really fascinating time to be in the sector. Do you agree with that, Dennis? That analysis?
No, absolutely. So I think there's so many moving components right now, and I think things are really accelerating. If you take a look at like you mentioned, the legislation, but also the demographics in the way of work, and you have this whole new population coming on the labor market with different expectations. So companies need to adjust to that, and they need to find new models of making that work for that new population of people getting on the job market. And I think that's really one of the drivers as well for MSPs to disrupt their models, to have new players on the market who don't follow that traditional model. And also legislation, like you mentioned, it's always been on the move. It's always been changing, but I think the pace of it is accelerating, and I think it's always something that the providers need to catch up on. Technology needs to catch up on. So it's a very interesting space with a lot of challenges, but some great opportunities out there as well.
Yeah, I might be shooting myself in the foot here, Dennis, for our procurement listeners, but the point of demographics, I agree with, right? Just generally speaking, particularly demographics in Western Europe and USA, they're, in short, over a 60-year time horizon, we simply haven't produced enough people for the labor market. But what I find interesting, Dennis, and this is just anecdotally and through my own observation, is that the age of the procurement buyer is getting younger. Now, maybe that's because I'm getting older, right? And that's, it's regrettable, but I'm still here, thank God. But and the reason I'm going with that tack is because back in, let's say, 10 years ago, when the demographic of procurement buyer was older, right? It makes sense. You get an MSP, you get a VMS, and then you let them look after the external workforce, you let them look after the suppliers. And of course, in a way, no one ever got fired for doing the old models because it worked. But what I've noticed, particularly over the last 5 years, is that a younger generation of procurement leaders and buyers are coming into the market. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, Dennis, but they're asking, well, why are we doing it this way? Why do we need an MSP? Why do we need a VMS? Why do we need 26 different HRIS and procurement systems that don't talk to each other? I know it's a weird way of looking at things, Dennis, but have you any observations on that point?
Well, I think it's something that I definitely recognize. So I think one of the things that is happening is you have a younger procurement professionals getting into the market as well, and they expect things to work like they would if they order anything on Amazon or whatever. And that's exactly where some of the big providers 10 years, 15 years ago have been struggling with. And we kind of always just simply said, okay, that's the way, there's complexity, etc. But I think the younger generation is not accepting it anymore, and it's really pushing the boundaries. And I think that's really interesting, because indeed, why would it be so complex to handle all that legislation? Why can't you just simply deploy one VMS across the globe and expect everything to run as smooth? I know there are challenges out there, but I think the expectation from this younger generation really pushes the envelope to a higher standard, and pushing the industry as well to say, okay, what can we do? So I think that's quite interesting, because their angle is a little bit different.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. And one of the things I wanted to ask, and I want to come back briefly to your company and the problems it solves for, but if we look at the staffing and the MSP sector specifically, I always think about 1980s stock markets, right? It was all old school. It was sort of nice British or American guys or Dutch guys in nice suits talking to each other, exchanging things. You'd have these open outcry trading pits in the stock market, and then technology came, Dennis, and it just eradicated all that. And it was a much more efficient, effective way to conduct trades and business. But it strikes me that the staffing and MSP sector has not had a big bang moment, that perhaps there's been incremental changes, but it also strikes me that the sector is probably ripe for disintermediation and disruption. What's your take on that? Because that's quite a cynical view from my perspective, Dennis.
No, I think there's two paces in the industry. I think you have very disruptive providers who really embrace some of those new elements and the new requirements from clients as well, and they openly adopt the new models, because they know they cannot keep up with the old models. It won't last forever. So I think that's you still have some of the older programs, and it works fine for clients who are satisfied with it. But I think the market is expecting more. They are expecting more innovation from the MSPs, and I think some of them are adopting to it. Some are really adopting some AI models that are really disruptive, that are really opening up something that I think most corporate clients have been looking for a long time, and that's the value, the concept, the consultative aspect, the trends. What do they need to do next? They don't want to keep on looking back on their program in what is in the past. They want to look in the future. And I think some of the MSP providers struggled to provide it, but I think AI, the digitalization of things, really offers now the opportunity to do it in a much more efficient way, in a much more easy way, and to bring that added value. So I think that's really where it will dependent on the MSP provider, how far they have progressed in the journey. But it's definitely something that I think it's accelerating, and I think those MSP providers, for instance, and service providers who do jump on those things and really join the learning curve, because it's going to be a learning curve for everyone, they will really excel in the future with this type of services.
I agree with you, Dennis. The way I see the sector potentially evolving is that MSPs can almost be like, and VMSs can almost be like a super connector or a utility that connect into HRIS systems, which of course happens today, connects into procure-to-pay systems, connects into talent ecosystems, whether that's marketplaces, internal talent pools, skills pools, but also can maybe connect into the bot world as well, right? So build, borrow, buy, bot, right? And I note with interest two developments in the market, Dennis. I was really interested in Randstad's partnership with Workday, which I think is a brilliant move and offers them a really defensive and offensive strategy against new entrants into the market. But also, I note that the Adecco Group have signed a deal with Salesforce essentially to allow their end customers to either hire a person, go internal, or hire a bot or an AI agent, which I think is a fascinating development in the market. And I was keen, Dennis, to get your take on those two things in particular, and indeed anything else you're seeing in the marketplace that you went, whoa, that's really interesting.
Well, I think for me it ties a little bit into the total talent management story, and it's interesting that you bring in the bots and the AI and all those things as well, because I think the market is ready for it, and I think we've been talking about total talent management for a long time, and but we didn't have those real live examples, simply because we considered the different components, the different technology components of it, not to be completely in one ecosphere. So we didn't dare to call it a full total talent management solution. And I think that perspective has shifted. I think we're ready to say, okay, it might not be all in one system. It might be the best of breeds to do that combination. But I think the build, the borrow, and the robotic aspect of it, I think that's really interesting, because it's really gonna be about, okay, if we hire it, we can calculate how much it would cost to hire someone, but what would be the price to upskill someone and to find those skills? And I think that's really there's some very interesting cases on that one as well, where you can really just have the calculation, like how much would it take me to source a candidate with those skills? How long do we expect to need the person, and how long do we also expect such a talent to stay within the company? Because those type of profiles, normally they want to do something for a short term, because that's really their specialty. So that's something a company needs to take into account. But then the aspect, like how much would it cost them to really upskill someone within the organization? What would be the cost? What would be the trainings that someone would need to follow to actually come to the same result? But then we have them in the organization for a longer term. And then, all AIs and the robotics things, I think there's a massive acceleration in that part as well. We used to accept that a simple chatbot would be enough. But nowadays we expect more. We really expect to be helped, and not just doing a decision tree almost with the chatbot. No, we really expect more, and the technology is ready to deliver more. And I think that's really interesting. And everyone is on a different path of maturity. But I think the ones really embracing it and now adopting it and experimenting with it, they will be so much better off in 5 years' time.
I love what you've just said there, Dennis, and I fully agree with your analysis and your thoughts. The other thing that comes to mind, Dennis, when I think about total workforce strategies or total talent management, and I know we hadn't planned really to cover this, but what the hell? It's an open conversation. That's the beauty of the show. But Doug Leby, the CEO of Beeline, always says it's about people, not pencils, right? And I agree with him to a point, but I always think it's about, if we look at how organizations procure the materials they need to make a pencil, why can't we take the same first principles that they have to properly resource demand or strategic workforce plan within our organizations? Because I think if you get that piece right, it will make it much easier to fulfill orders, if you like. And those orders are either borrow, build, or bot. And I think that's always been the problem with the traditional MSP and staffing model, is that they're coming to the market last in time, when really they should be coming first in time, because they've worked closely with the business to resource demand plan properly. So I suppose what my question is, Dennis, is resource demand planning or strategic workforce planning a key piece of the puzzle to getting this right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's something that I fully agree with that. The challenge is having that strategic view. Where do you want to have your company in 5 years' time? Where do you want to have it in 10 years' time? I mean, if we take a look at companies like an Apple, really those innovative players at the time, they had a strategy. They knew, like, that's where I want to be in 10 years. How do I get there? no clue. But at least they had a very clear vision on where they want to get. And I think it's the same for strategic workforce planning. It's absolutely necessary that you define that endpoint to say, okay, in 5 or 10 years, that's where I want to be. These are the skills I want to have in my organization to deliver these strategic things I want to do with the company. But it's very challenging. It's very challenging, and to elaborate on it, I think it's the market is very volatile today, even more than ever. It's ever changing, so also companies need to adjust very quickly. They need to be much more agile. So the workforce planning requires to be something that they need to prepare for properly. And I think, again, not all companies have the same maturity on that level, but it's absolutely key to do that. Because if you compare it to pens and pencils, you kind of know how much demand you will have. But but for for the workforce, it's kind of more challenging. So I think it definitely has a couple of challenges. But doing that diligent work of the workforce planning, having those AI tools in place as well to make a forecast on which one you need to have, which are the skills you want to have in the future, taking multiple parameters into account. That complexity, I think that is really where an AI-driven strategic workforce planning can help so much in getting those strategies rolled out and having a real plan, a long-term plan on which resources you want to have for your organization. Do they need to be contractors? Do they need to be short-term consultants? Do I want to convert certain people in a role? What are the expectations of the workforce as well? Because that's changing as well. You can make a perfect workforce planning, but you need to see on the type of profiles you're going to be hiring, what their expectations might be, what is typical for their type of roles and etc. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I had a question for you, Dennis, in relation to skills and skills-based hiring. I sorry, I've got a bit of a dodgy throat, but on skills-based hiring, I think you referenced it earlier, internal skills, right? How we can find them, Dennis. But are you seeing in some of the enterprises that you advise any interest in companies like Gloat or Gig.ai or Degree that have internal skills marketplaces? Is the enterprise ready for these, particularly in the contingent or extended workforce world? Are you seeing some early appetite for that, Dennis?
Yeah, I think some companies have the appetite, but I think it really depends on the maturity and the involvement of an HR. I think that is typically where it's an interesting discussion, because that's really where HR and talent acquisition comes in. Whereas I think typically in our industry of 10 years ago, it was procurement driven. And they didn't look into that space enough. And that, I mean, there's no harm done. But I think going forward, that's really the ownership of HR and talent acquisition to look into those things. And I think they are stepping up in that role. So I think there's definitely room for those type of technologies and tools. But I think it really depends on the maturity of the clients. And I think it should be owned by talent acquisition and HR, because that's really where you want to do that skills mapping. Yeah? You want to do it for your internal resource, but you want to do it as well for the external talent you have in the organization. That's the only way how you can map it out for your strategic workforce planning as well.
I agree with you, Dennis. So, Dennis, just coming back to your consulting business for a moment, would you mind just describing, for the benefit of our audience, what that consulting business does and the sort of size and scale of the customers that you work with?
Sure. So we focus mainly on the corporate clients. That's our first go-to, who are really looking into any advisory from a strategy level or on a technology consultation what would be a best fit for their organization to manage contingent workforce programs, and by a larger extent, any total talent management programs. So we really focus on the very early stages of some of those tracks. So really building up the analysis, doing the analysis work, making the recommendations, doing the full-blown procurement work, so supporting with any RFI and RFP, and going down to into implementation as well. So that's also where we support. And I think there's quite some companies out there who need that additional objective and neutral extra pair of eyes on that process. I think that's where we see the value, and that's where we also see the value in a proper solution design. As you were just mentioning with strategic workforce planning, I think it's also the same thing for any contingent workforce strategy you want to apply, or any VMS or FMS solution, or whatever solution you want to put in place. It's really assessing what is the needs of the client and what options are there, because I think it's quite challenging for people new on the markets, new procurement buyers, etc., to make the distinction. And I still notice that there's a lot of confusion. We use so many terminology. What is an FMS? What is a marketplace? What is an RPO? What is a VMS and an MSP? I think we are used to it because we're in the industry. But for someone who's just taking this on additionally, I think there's definitely a market for an additional consulting, and that's where we really try to support our clients with those type of advisory tracks.
Yeah, and I fully agree with what you said there, Dennis, and I think it's a great business that you've got, because even if I think about some of the global deals that I've worked in when I'm not presenting and hosting the podcast, right? Typically, a global MSP and VMS on a typical basis will start in North America, right? Where if the company's headquartered there, and oftentimes there's not sufficient realization planning that Europe's going to be different from USA, really around legislation and the taxation, but also the cultural piece, and also in certain countries in Europe, as you'll appreciate, and some of our European audience listeners will appreciate, MSPs aren't widely adopted in certain European countries compared to the USA. And then when you roll it forward then into APAC, with the exception of maybe Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course Australia, New Zealand, again, the adoption of MSP and VMS is much slower, and indeed the adoption of extended or contingent workforces for legislation reasons, the sort of fixed term workers. And I think that's probably where a company like yours would really come into their own, Dennis, because I've seen so many programs like that have failed or haven't sufficiently got off the ground because there hasn't been that realization and independent advice around, well, here's the 8 things that you need to consider as you're rolling out a program globally or even across Europe. For the benefit of our audience, Dennis, would you have any advice for any companies that are thinking about rolling out, without giving away your IP, of course, but on a general basis about rolling out an MSP, VMS, or total workforce plan across the globe?
Well, I think it really depends on where is the pain in your program. I think you have the saying, you follow the money, but it's also where is the pain in your organization? What is it that you're trying to solve? And I think that's really where you want to focus on first. So also geographically, I think there's the traditional components. Where is your spend? Where is your volume? What MSPs and VMS solution do you have available in the maturity level of the market? But I think for me, it's really what you first need to establish is where is your program struggling? What are the pain points you're having? And based on that, I would always do a recommendation to really define where you would start off your program. And I think I've even did advisories where I said it's better off to kick off things in Europe as well, instead of kicking it off in the US. Maybe the US has the biggest volume in your market, in your program, but maybe it's better to handle the complexity first in Europe, set up a program that can really handle that one. Because if you nail that one down, then the US one will be much more easier, because it might be a little bit a more easy market. So why don't we kick off with some of the more complex markets, as long as the volume is significant enough? Other things I've advised on as well is we're always, I think, the traditional approach, and that's by the nature of the MSPs being traditionally linked to some of the staffing providers, is to kick off with the traditional contingent staff augmentation piece. But I think also there's an opportunity to see things in a different way, to really make it a more encompassing solution, to really grab and have a full view on the full external population, and maybe not to a full extent doing a full staff augmentation, but at least have that full visibility, get the data in, and start working from there in a year down the line. And I think that's very often steps that are overlooked, and trying to run before you can walk. I think that's something typically a lot of companies do as well. And it's about overpromising as well. I think in the sales process there will be MSPs who overpromise, and also VMS providers who overpromise. And I think it's really those type of things where you need to challenge them on, and maybe just take it small and build from there, but with a view of not the traditional contingent staffing, but the view on the full capacity. So I think it really depends on the client needs, but yeah, it is something that I believe you need to tailor down based on the requirements of the client. But follow the pain. That's always my.
I like that. I think that's good advice, Follow the pain. It does pleasantly and positively surprise me, though, Dennis, how many large global enterprises still do not have, maybe forget about MSP, but even just a centralized and governed approach to how external workers or external suppliers that are providing workers are governed and managed, and how the risk is apportioned. Oftentimes it strikes me that there's no layer over it. There's no oversight. And of course, this in my day-to-day job, that's what you want, right? But it is interesting to note that there's still many large enterprises that don't have anything.
No, that's true. And I think it really depends on the organizational structure as well. You might have an international organization, but if in the end the P&L sits in country and they want to have a focus on certain things, then there might not be as much attention and focus on that. But I think that's really where there's a great opportunity to really align on that holistic view internationally, and to have that governance structure. And I think it comes back to the point earlier on the strategic workforce planning, because if you are going to be defining a certain sourcing mix in terms of internal resources, external, but also what is the right location, you need to start to get that visibility, and you need to have someone who can look beyond the scope of one country and really have that ownership and drive that piece on a larger scale. But it requires a certain maturity. It requires definitely a senior buy-in from management as well, because otherwise it's really hard to deploy.
I agree with you, Dennis. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, Dennis, and I know you and I worked together a couple of years ago on this, is a lot of large enterprises are suffering from this demographic problem, particularly in the Western labour markets. We touched on it briefly earlier, but in short, the birth rate in the European Union has declined by 30% since 1961 to 2021, 30% decrease, which has meant that there's less people participating in the labour force. And then most Western economies have essentially closed their borders, right, to migrants, inward migrants, or at least made it more difficult. Certainly in the case of the UK and the USA, some of the biggest labour markets in the world, apart from Netherlands, of course, and again, Western Labour, they've essentially saying, don't come to our country, you're not welcome. So what that has meant, in my view, Dennis, is that organizations and enterprises have had to say, well, actually, if we can't get the talent in Netherlands and we can't get the talent in Germany and we can't get the talent in Ireland or UK, that we're going to have to go to Africa and India and the Philippines.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that a lot of organizations don't know how to manage that. But I think that's point number one, Dennis. And I'm not sure if you agree with that, but come back to that in a second. But the second point is that strikes me as a likely direction of travel, because places like India, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, Philippines have high population growth, whereas Western economies do not. So it strikes me that you have to go and get the talent, but you cannot bring them physically to your country for all the reasons that we know. So do you think that's a bigger problem? Do you think that's a big problem that exists out there? And do you think more organizations are going to go in that direction, Dennis, to find the talent they need?
I think it's a problem that exists, but I'm not 100% sure if all the organizations have it really physically on their radar as a big issue. Because the problem at this point is not reaching exuberant levels yet of panic, but I think in the coming years it will come. So for me, it's a matter of getting prepared for that right now and getting the right thing set up. And I think to your point, I think it will be a matter of getting the right sourcing strategies for those locations. It's a matter of thinking of, do we need to build offices there, or can we work with an outsourced service provider, or do we have the flexibility to say, okay, we'll be working with some freelance resources. I mean, COVID opened up like a massive opportunity for really well-educated people across the globe, and we never had the access to tap into that talent. So I think for me, it's really about opening up and adjusting your policies as well. Now, I know there's a lot of parameters to take into account, but it's definitely something that companies need to look into for their long-term strategic workforce planning. How do they want to indeed level up and compensate for that declining worker population, especially in the Western countries? So I think that's really a key element. And whether they do it in an outsourcing setup, in a hybrid setup with freelancers, they do it in any other capacity. I think it will be interesting to see how they evolve. But I know no companies are looking into it. But again, it depends on the needs, on the type of skills they want, the type of services they do demand for it. Do they want to have services covered 24/7? Then it's a perfect opportunity. I know there's a couple of centers opened by, I think it was Microsoft as well in South Africa as well, if I'm not mistaken. So I think they find really the great talent there as well. So things that have never been tapped into, I think it's definitely opening up. But it's for companies also a struggle. Like, how do you match it? How do you match it with what services we want to bring? What are the skills? Where do we have a good supply of the skills and talent for specific things? So I think that's really it comes down to, again, to the long-term strategy. What location do we want to cover, and where can I find the resources, in what contract type, and does it even matter? For me, that's a huge question as well. Like, does it even matter as long as you get the right service, if you get the right quality, as long as the right compliance checks are covered and you're getting the service delivered, then yeah, that is something you need to take into the equation.
It's really a fascinating time, though, Dennis, isn't it? Just listening to you there in our sector, the opportunities, I think, are endless, and the possibilities are really there to be grasped. I was thinking about, I went to another ProcureCon event last week, Dennis. It was more geared towards the chief procurement officers, and I really enjoyed it for a number of reasons, because I love procurement people. Because I've worked with procurement people basically all my working life now, right? Nearly 20 years. And I've worked with hundreds of procurement leaders and people in USA and Europe and APAC and pretty much around the globe. And there's probably three things that have struck me about what makes a really good procurement leader or person, Dennis, which is honesty, integrity, right? But also a sense of, actually four things: sense of justice and fairness, right? And that fairness piece about treating suppliers as partners. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can't have hard conversations. That doesn't mean that you cannot say to your suppliers, I'm angry with you because you didn't deliver. Your margins are too high because our margins are shrinking, so you need to eat some of that. But it strikes me that the best procurement people, of course, are innovators, they're leaders, but they have that innate sense of fairness and integrity. And I suppose my question is, Dennis, do you agree with that sentiment that the best procurement people have that just innate sense of fairness? And, I think procurement has got a rap always about cost containment and cost control, which are, of course, big drivers. I'm well aware of that. But procurement is often seen as sort of like the evil uncle, right? When actually they're doing a really good job. They're building this ecosystem of partners and suppliers to make their company better, right? And getting a good deal. What's your take on those qualities, Dennis? Would you agree?
I think the expectation from a procurement professional, a procurement leader, has evolved quite a lot over the years. I think initially procurement was looked at, I think, dependent on the organization, but you either have more administrative procurement, or really the cost savings procurement. But I think most recently procurement has really evolved a lot, and also the procurement leaders. I think you can only squeeze costs so much, but it's really about building that value and building the trust from the business. And I think that comes back to the points you were making earlier about the honesty and having a fair deal for everyone, for the company, but also for the suppliers and the partners in that game. And I think that's really what a lot of procurement people are driving. They really get that pride from delivering a solution that works for everyone. I think just the time that you could squeeze a supplier, and then you report the savings, and then the business spends it again. That's still happens, obviously. But I think really the partnership with the business, the partnership with the suppliers, it really requires a different set of skills, a different mentality, and a different character from procurement people than it used to be maybe like 20 years ago. And I think it's something to applaud for. And I think what is really interesting as well is, again, coming back on the AI piece. I know we covered it, but I think AI is really helping to reduce the tedious and the boring stuff, like building the RFPs and doing all those things, and doing all the contracting and reviewing the contracting and the compliancy. It's part of the job of procurement. It's part of the job, but it's time consuming and it's quite intensive. So if we can take away those things, then I think procurement can really focus on the humane aspects of it and really driving that value. And I think that's really where I see a massive evolution in the procurement functions as well, and also the innovation being driven from procurement to really bring that added value for organizations. And I think it's really something that usually they get brought in at the table for cost savings, but I really see that they, due to COVID and the complexity they needed to handle in many ways, really earned their seat at the table, and they're sticking to it. And I think that's really, they became a very respected partner. And I think the values you just mentioned are key for any procurement professional to drive that fair deal for everyone.
Yeah, I agree, Dennis. And I want to come back to your point on AI in a bit more detail in a few moments. But I always think the best procurement people, of course, have that commercial edge, right? They're brilliant negotiators. They're representing the best interests of the end customer that they represent. But also they're relationship people. And in fact, I would suggest that in my experience, some of the best relationship people I've ever worked with are in the procurement field, right? They're interested in the long-term relationship. Yes, of course, they're going to get a good deal, but in a way, they're really relationship guys and really good relationship guys, in my view. Is that oversimplistic or?
No,
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting you say that, and I'll tell you why. Because I think when we speak about relationship type of people, I think we usually in our industry we say it's HR and it's talent acquisition. But I think what you're mentioning is true. Huh? I think procurement also is keen on getting that interaction with people, getting to help the business with requirements, getting the best thing, building the relationship with partners and suppliers. And I think that's also what is really in our industry is starting to bring together procurements and talent acquisition and HR. And we're starting to finally see the merger of some of those teams, or someone in HR going to procurement and procurement going into HR. I mean, and I think that's good. I think that's really an amazing trend because in essence, I think we have a different angle, HR as procurement, but really the values and what is driving them, the passion is about connecting with people as well, knowing to engage with suppliers on innovative solutions. That's really what is interesting for those procurement professionals to get solutions for the business and building those relationships. So, and yeah, I think it's really interesting to finally see those programs, in-house programs, also really being co-owned by procurement and talent acquisition. And I think it's about time as well. I think it's been too long. That it took quite a while, but we're really seeing the examples now, and I think it's really driving much more mature programs and a more holistic approach to a lot of the programs.
Yeah, I agree, Dennis, with that. And we had Melina Sertis from PMI on the show recently, and she was she gives some brilliant examples of how she was able to achieve that in her organization, bringing the two functions together. And I think that's the future direction, and I think it's most welcome. But the relationship piece is absolutely key from procurement professionals, and it's interesting, Dennis. I agree with you. I think AI will get rid of a lot of the mundane but necessary tasks that procurement professionals unfortunately have to do, which will free them up for the relationship building piece, which will consequently, in my view, create more innovation because they're spending more time with suppliers that can tell them what is the cutting edge or what is different and what can be improved. And I think that will only be to the benefit of the organizations that they represent. But Dennis, staying on AI, right? I'm a glass half full person. Like, you know me, I'm always smiling, always generally happy. I know I was late to get the show going today, which I'll apologize publicly for. No, I'm sorry I was delayed. But generally I'm a positive guy and positive person. But when it comes to artificial intelligence and jobs, and specifically jobs displacement, which in my mind means jobs are going, right? I'm really concerned. And I'm really concerned when I look at the data, or at least the predictions that come from World Economic Forum. So I think from memory, they're forecasting 14 million net losses of jobs, particularly in the white collar space over the next 2-year time period, 2025 to 2027. Of course, we're into the second quarter now as we speak in 2025. I'm really concerned about that, even though I'm hypocritical, Dennis, because I'm using ChatGPT on the enterprise level. It's doing all the business plans and the stuff that I hate doing. It's doing business cases like it's going out of fashion. But I know at some point in my business, I'm going to have to choose, even though I'm a people person, between AI and people. And when I choose AI over people, that basically means job losses. And like, we're a medium-sized global business. We're not, IBM or Big Bank A or Big Bank B, or companies at that size and scale that are going to be faced with much tougher choice. Well, it's always tough, but we're talking in their cases potentially of thousands, hundreds to thousands of job losses. And for me, that's problematic, obviously, because I try to be a decent person. But of course, I've got a responsibility to my people. I've got a responsibility to my shareholders. And it's a really, in my view, difficult and potentially scary time. And of course, people will say, well, of course, more jobs will be created. but no one's really saying what those jobs will be. And I suppose what my question is, Dennis, what's your view on this? Do you think AI is a threat or an opportunity, particularly when it comes to jobs?
I think there's multiple aspects to it. I think AI AI will will there will be job losses, as you said, and I think there was another story, as a publication of some of the first jobs impacted as well, and within freelancers. Then, from what I remember, and that's the more creative roles, even. So the writers, the translators. I mean, we've all been using all of the translation services on Google, etc. But I think AI will really have a massive impact there, and we already see it. They lost 20% of their average rate, so their rates are going down. The number of assignments are going down, and I'm afraid it's going to be a trend that will continue to do so. On the other side, I read an article that video enhancement roles, so anyone specialized in those type of roles, any AI enablers, anyone building those models, they will have an opportunity. But that leaves a lot of people besides that
Of
that
course.
will be impacted. Yeah, they will be impacted, and I think we cannot even grasp at this point to what extent it will be. If I take a look at how your example, how you are using it, but how a lot of people are using it, it's a double cutting knife.
Yes.
You're using it, but you're learning it how to do it even better in the
Yes.
future, and it's very scary. And I think it will be. I mean, I'm excited for what technology can bring and the opportunities, and in that sense, I'm really, from the opportunity side, I'm thinking on all the supportive things that AI can bring. Also, the more neutral recruitment process that you can bring, people that don't have a chance to get picked up by recruiters, but by the full analysis of AI, they have a chance. The diversity and inclusion, there's a lot more opportunities. But
Great.
in terms of job loss, yeah, I think that will be one of the main challenges. And one of the main challenges, what will you do with that massive workforce? It will be hard to completely upskill them.
I agree.
If you ask me into tomorrow, like, can you go start programming something in for AI? I'm gonna be gone. Connor, we need to set up new business. But I think it's one of the massive challenges. I think there's opportunities, but it's gonna be one of the massive challenges for companies to see how they will go about it. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. Like I've got two young daughters, Dennis, they're 8 and 5, right? And I'm fearful of their future, right? So if they go through school and potentially do university or to college or into a job, I mean, what is there going to be for them? Of course, artificial intelligence will throw up things that we can't even imagine, I'm sure, right? I mean, like if you think about 20 years ago, did you think you'd have, a supercomputer, a mini supercomputer in your pocket that you would almost be physically attached to? So maybe we could not have imagined that then, Dennis, and maybe we cannot imagine the jobs of tomorrow, but I'm definitely concerned for my children and other children in terms of what will be left for them, if anything. And hopefully there is. I mean, I'm a positive guy, a positive person, but it definitely does concern me.
Absolutely, yeah. And I share that concern. It will be. It's one of the things I'm faced with as well for my
Yes.
kids. It's like you used to be able to say, okay, that's clearly the path going forward, and if you pick these things for university later, you're gonna be good. But
Yes.
that's gonna be the big question mark for the future. So yeah, it will be quite challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I've got a bet. I'm willing to hang my hat on this, Dennis, and I'd love to get your thoughts, right? And my bet is that people's sustainability in large enterprises will become just as important, if not more important, than ESG, because how companies deal with that displacement, particularly the larger companies, but also deal with the people that they will be left behind in their organizations, I think will be one of the key problems, opportunities, challenges that the large companies need to address. And my bet is that people sustainability will become a key procurement function. What's your take on that, Dennis? Are you saying anything?
No, that's an interesting one, and I think it's also one of the elements that will that the current younger generation, those that we need to bring into the companies in a few years. What will their expectation be? And I think that can be one of the elements as well, to say, okay, they want to work for an ethical company who takes those things into account. Do they want to work for a company they know that they just replaced a lot of people with AI bots or whatever? So I think that will be an interesting one to follow up. And I agree. I think it might become one of those measures that, next to the CSRD piece and ESG piece, that will become one of those components next to the sustainability, the green aspects of companies, because it will be one of the elements that will attract the younger generation as well. So it will be interesting.
Yeah, we'll have to watch this space. So,
Yeah.
Dennis, when we first met, you were obviously working in one of the leading HR tech stroke VMS companies, Beeline. I think over the last 5 years, fueled by COVID, fueled by a wave of VC and PE money, we've seen so many HR tech solutions. At one point, I was tracking them, but I've lost track of that. There was literally hundreds, and loads of organizations have bought loads of these single point HR tech solutions. I suppose my question is, do you think there's too many of these solutions, Dennis, on the market?
That's a difficult question. I think there's a lot of solutions out there in the market, and they serve their purpose, and I think they're really good at what they're trying to solve. What I do question is how scalable will they be for larger volumes, and that will be the big question mark. If they will be able to address a critical mass to be sustainable in the long term. And I'm not sure. I mean, we've seen it before as well, that great technologies, they get absorbed as well by some of the other players. And I think the good ones that have a good solution but maybe not scalable enough, those are the ones that will be absorbed at some point, I believe. And that's also what you've been seeing as well the last few years within some of the other bigger providers. There's been an absorption of some of those smaller players who really solve certain problems in the market that the big ones couldn't do, or they didn't want to solve it because it was too complex. And the small ones are solving it. So the very specialist niche HR solutions, they have a really great solution for certain aspects.
Yes.
But would it be enough for companies to only pick that one and buy that solution within? I think they need to bring it in a larger ecosphere. But at some point, I think there will be consolidations going on as well, and yeah, I think that will be interesting for the market as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think more consolidation is the likely direction of travel. So Dennis, unfortunately, our conversation's coming towards a close, and I'd love to finish with a question that we ask all of our guests, which is, what is your prediction or predictions for the future of work?
Very big question and a challenging one. I think one of the key elements will be one of the key challenges for the future of work is the companies adapting the right skilling sets and the right upskilling for any type of talent. And I think one of the big trends you will see is people won't follow the traditional paths anymore. So the traditional hiring paths, companies will really adapt to facilitate any other contracting forms besides the traditional ones, because I think coming again on the new work population and currently the organizations facing different generational workforce, there will need to be solutions delivered for them, and it will need to be tailor made. There won't be one fit for all. So I really see the future of work being something hybrid model with a combination of robotics, AI, and people with the right skills for the right moments, for the right strategy for a company.
Yeah, Dennis, I love what you said there. Back in my staffing days, we would have summarized it this way. We would have said, "Do you have the skills to pay the bills?" But I think that's a crude summary of what you've just said. But Dennis, firstly, thanks so much for coming on the show. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversations, and I know that our audience and our listenership will also have enjoyed it very much. I really appreciate you making the time to speak with me, Dennis. And
Okay.
like all our conversations, it certainly put a smile on my face, but I've really got to tap into that amazing brain of yours. So, Dennis, thanks so much for making the time.
Thank
And
you.
Dennis would be great. But Dennis, again, just if our audience wants to reach out to you and avail of your consulting services or hear more about what's going on in total workforce or extended workforce or contingent workforce, where's the best place to reach out and find you?
Well, it's going to be on our website through www.akonsulting.com, and there we'll be able to follow up to contact or reach out through LinkedIn. Happy to support there as well.
Dennis, fantastic. Thanks again. Wishing you every success for your business. I know it's going gangbusters, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. All the best, Dennis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Connor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.